The night was perfect for the most anticipated gala of the year in New York City. The ballroom at the Crystal Palace, illuminated by gleaming chandeliers, sparkled with the luxury and elegance of America's high society. Sophia, dressed in a long black gown, observed every detail of the event with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. She was used to being the only black woman at these events, but despite having faced curious looks before, she felt something different that night. The event was hosted by the family of her boyfriend, Ethan, and all eyes were on her. The soft music that filled the air seemed distant amid the whirlwind of thoughts running through Sophia's mind. It was a special night for Ethan, who was about to be announced as the new director of one of his family's companies. And Sophia knew this was her chance to finally meet his mother, Margaret, properly. Ethan introduced her to a few people, and although Sophia smiled politely, she couldn't help but notice the suspicious glances and the superficial tone of the conversations. There was something about the way people looked at her that turned the luxurious setting into a cold and hostile place. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked, noticing the tension in Sophia's face. She nodded with a restrained smile, but inside, she felt like she was about to face something much bigger than she had expected. As they approached the main table, Margaret was waiting for them. Elegant and imposing, she smiled at Sophia, though her eyes remained cold. "So, this is Sophia," Margaret said, with a tone that carried an unspoken judgment. Sophia felt the weight of the encounter, as if she were being evaluated by someone who had already made up her mind before even meeting her. Sophia forced a smile, trying to keep her composure, but she knew the night had only just begun. The dinner conversation started peacefully, but it quickly took a turn when Margaret, after a few minutes of silence, made her first comment. "You must feel a bit out of place here, don't you, Sophia?" she said with a smile that felt more like a challenge than a gesture of sympathy. "After all, you come from a very different world than ours." Sophia felt the words hit like a blow. She knew Margaret was testing her, and the pain of being treated as an outsider was undeniable. She exchanged a quick glance with Ethan, hoping he would say something in her defense, but he remained silent, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm not sure if I feel out of place," Sophia replied calmly, trying to maintain her dignity. "But it's certainly a new environment for me." The silence that followed her words was unsettling. The other guests around the table continued their conversations as if nothing had happened, but Sophia could feel the eyes on her, as if everyone were waiting for her next move. As the evening progressed, Sophia tried to engage in conversations, but she was consistently ignored or met with dry, superficial responses. The feeling of isolation grew, and each passing moment made her feel more out of place. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed focused on maintaining peace, but his hesitation to confront his mother was deeply painful for Sophia. Margaret continued to watch Sophia with a mixture of superiority and disdain. With each subtly malicious comment, Sophia felt as though she was fighting a silent battle, where every word tested her patience. Sophia began to wonder if it was truly worth trying to fit into a world that so clearly did not want to accept her. As the night wore on, Sophia's discomfort only intensified. As the toasts began, she felt increasingly on the sidelines, watching everything from a distant perspective, even though she was physically present. The guests discussed topics that subtly excluded her, leaving her apart from the group. The laughter that echoed throughout the room felt hollow, and the furtive glances she received became harder to ignore. The situation reached its peak when one of Ethan's friends, a well-dressed man clearly comfortable among the powerful, stood up to make a toast. He turned to Sophia with a smile that seemed innocent at first glance but concealed a sharp malice. "It's so nice to see that Ethan has such exotic taste," he said with a false cordiality, while a few others chuckled quietly. The word exotic cut through Sophia like a knife, its cruel intention unmistakable. It wasn't a compliment. It was a way to reduce her to something unusual, different, and above all, inferior. Sophia felt her blood boil, but at the same time, a wave of humiliation washed over her. The suppressed laughter that followed made the already hostile environment unbearable. She looked around for support from Ethan, but all she found was his silence, as he lowered his eyes, unable to face the situation. Margaret, sitting next to Ethan, did nothing to stop the humiliation. In fact, she seemed to relish Sophia's discomfort, keeping her calm and superior expression. It was as if the silence from everyone in the room was a tacit acceptance of the insult. Without saying a word, Sophia rose from the table. The knot in her throat was so tight she could barely breathe. With quick steps, she left the ballroom and headed for the garden, feeling small and exposed, as if all her worth had been erased by a single comment. In the garden of the Crystal Palace, Sophia found a secluded corner, surrounded by blooming rose bushes, but nothing about the beauty around her could calm her. The tears she had tried to hold back for so long finally ran down her face. All she wanted was to disappear, to escape from the place that was rejecting her so cruelly. She sat on a marble bench and took a deep breath, trying to collect her thoughts. She knew she had faced prejudice before, but the pain of being publicly humiliated, right in front of Ethan, without any defense from him, was unbearable. She had imagined many times what it would be like to be accepted into that circle, to integrate into Ethan's family, but now it seemed like a distant fantasy. Minutes later, she heard footsteps behind her. It was Ethan, who had finally decided to come after her. "Sophia," he began, his voice hesitant as he approached cautiously. "I'm so sorry for what happened in there." Sophia looked up, quickly wiping her tears. "Sorry?" Her voice came out broken, filled with pain. "You sat there, Ethan. You didn't say a word. How could you let them talk about me like that?" Ethan lowered his head, unsure of how to respond. He knew he had made a mistake, but he was trapped between the desire to keep peace with his family and the love he felt for Sophia. I didn't know what to say. It all happened so fast." "Didn't know what to say?" Sophia stood up, her voice gaining strength. "You could have said anything, but you chose silence. You chose to stand by while I was treated like I didn't belong there." Ethan tried to move closer, but Sophia stepped back. "I love you, Sophia. Please understand. My mother, she has a strong influence over me. I don't want to hurt anyone." Sophia looked at him with a mixture of sadness and disappointment. "What about me, Ethan? I'm the one you're hurting here. I thought you were on my side." Ethan sighed, struggling to find the right words. "I am on your side. I just don't know how to deal with this. My mother, this world, they're complicated." Sophia felt another wave of tears building but held them back. "If it's so complicated for you, maybe I shouldn't be here." She turned and walked away from Ethan, leaving him alone in the garden, lost in his own conflicts. Sophia knew that wasn't the solution she wanted, but in that moment, she couldn't see another way to protect what little dignity she had left. As Sophia left the garden, Margaret, still inside the ballroom, maintained her usual posture, head held high and eyes sharp, watching everything around her. She observed the guests, who were now scattered in informal conversations, laughing and toasting as if nothing had happened. But inside, Margaret felt a restlessness, a doubt she couldn't ignore. Sophia's behavior that night, her reaction to the cruel comments, touched Margaret in an unexpected way. She knew she had provoked the young woman, but now she was beginning to wonder if she had gone too far. An old family friend, Dorothy, approached Margaret with a discreet smile. They hadn't seen each other in years, but when they met, the air was thick with nostalgia. After some pleasantries, Dorothy mentioned something that would shake Margaret deeply. "Did you know, Margaret, that your grandmother, Dorothy, my namesake, had African ancestry?" Margaret frowned, thinking she must have misheard. "What?" Dorothy nodded, as if about to reveal a long-held secret. "Yes, dear. Your grandmother, Dorothy, was the child of a union between a Spanish man and an African woman. This was kept hidden for a long time. Back then, things were different. The family decided to bury that part of history." Margaret froze for a few seconds, feeling as though the ground beneath her was about to give way. How could that be true? She, who had always prided herself on her lineage and pure bloodline, was now confronted with the revelation that her own family had hidden a past that challenged everything she believed. The conversation with Dorothy was brief, but its impact was profound. Margaret felt a mixture of shock and denial, but at the same time, she couldn't ignore the possibility that it might be true. And if it was, what did that mean for her? For her worldview? For the way she had treated Sophia up until that moment? As the party continued, Margaret, lost in thought, walked out onto the balcony, seeking air. For the first time in many years, she felt vulnerable, unable to control what was coming. The revelation of her own African ancestry made her question her deepest beliefs, those that had shaped her life until now. If it were true, how could she continue to judge Sophia by the color of her skin? How could she keep maintaining the barriers she had always placed between her family and the other? While Margaret reflected alone on the balcony, Ethan found her. He had spent the last few minutes trying to organize his thoughts after his conversation with Sophia, and now he was determined to confront his mother. Seeing her there, thoughtful and serious, he realized that something was different about her. Maybe it was the night. Maybe it was something deeper. "Mom, can we talk?" he asked, approaching slowly. Margaret looked at him, and for a moment, Ethan saw something different in her eyes. It wasn't the usual coldness or superiority. There was doubt. "Of course, Ethan. What's going on?" "You know what's going on. The way you treated Sophia tonight was unacceptable. I can't ignore it anymore. You need to understand that I love her, and she's part of my life, whether you like it or not." Margaret took a deep breath, trying to maintain her composure. "Ethan, you know it's not easy for me. She doesn't belong to this world. Things are different. I just want what's best for you. And who decides what's best for me? You? Because if that's the case, I don't want what you think is best. I want Sophia. And if you can't accept that, maybe it's you who doesn't belong in my life anymore." Margaret felt the sting of his words like a slap. Ethan had never spoken to her like that before. He had always been the obedient son, the perfect heir. Now he was rebelling against everything she had built. "Would you really do that?" Margaret asked in a lower voice. "Would you abandon your own mother because of her?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, but then something seemed to clear in his mind. "Mom, this isn't about abandoning you. It's about who I am. And Sophia is a part of me. If you can't accept that, I can't keep pretending everything's fine. Tonight, you humiliated her. Not just her, but me too." Margaret was about to respond when Ethan, with a firm look, continued, "And there's something else. I found out something that made me think. Did you know your grandmother had African ancestry?" The color drained from Margaret's face. She wasn't prepared to hear that from her own son. "Who told you that?" "It doesn't matter who. What matters is that you've been judging Sophia by the color of her skin while hiding a truth about your own family. Does that make any sense to you?" Margaret tried to deny it, tried to come up with an excuse, but Ethan's words had hit her in her most vulnerable spot. She had always prided herself on her lineage, but now it all seemed like a farce. "That doesn't change anything," Margaret replied, almost desperately trying to maintain control of the situation. "It changes everything," Ethan retorted. "And if you can't see that, then I'm leaving with Sophia. I'm standing by her, even if you won't stand by me." The silence that followed was suffocating. Margaret, for the first time in a long while, didn't know what to say. Ethan, without another word, turned and walked away, leaving his mother alone, torn between her pride and the painful reality. Sophia was at home, lying on the couch, still trying to process everything that had happened at the gala. The pain of the humiliation was still fresh, like a wound that wouldn't stop throbbing. She wondered if she had made the right choice in leaving Ethan behind in the garden. Was it really worth continuing their relationship, knowing that his family despised her for something as superficial as her appearance? The sound of the doorbell interrupted her thoughts. She hesitated for a moment but eventually got up to answer. When she opened the door, she saw Ethan. His eyes were tired, but there was a determination on his face that Sophia had never seen before. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low and filled with emotion. Sophia stepped aside to let him in. They both sat on the couch, a heavy silence hanging between them. Ethan was the first to speak. "Sophia, I've been thinking about everything that happened, about how my mother treated you and how I failed to defend you He looked at the floor for a moment, ashamed. I should have done something then. I should have protected you. Sophia took a deep breath, her conflicting emotions pulsing inside her. It's not just about that night, Ethan. It's about what it means for our future. How can we stay together when your mother hates me? I can't spend the rest of my life fighting against this. Ethan looked her directly in the eyes. I know, and that's why I've made a decision. I'm gonna stand by your side, Sophia, no matter what. If it means cutting ties with my mother, then I'm willing to do that. I can't lose you. Ethan's words took Sophia by surprise. She wanted to believe him, but she was still hurt and unsure if she could keep fighting this battle. Do you really think that's enough? Sophia asked, her voice filled with doubt. Because it's not just your mother. It's your entire world. And I wonder if you're ready to sacrifice all of that. Ethan moved closer and held her hands tightly. I'm not just willing, Sophia. I've already made my choice. My mother may not accept it, but that doesn't change how I feel about you. I want to be with you, and nothing will change that. Sophia felt a lump form in her throat. The sincerity in Ethan's eyes touched her deeply, but the fear of facing a future filled with prejudice still dominated her. I don't know if I can keep going like this, Sophia murmured, feeling the tears welling up. I love you, Ethan, but what happened that night made me realize how painful this can be. And I don't know if I'm willing to go through it again. Ethan held her hands tighter. Sophia, please, give me another chance. I know it won't be easy, but I'm willing to fight for us. I won't let anyone humiliate you again. Not my mother. Not anyone. Sophia was silent for a moment, considering his words. She wanted to believe that their love could overcome everything, but she knew this decision would require sacrifices from both of them. However, looking into Ethan's eyes, she realized that he was truly committed. Finally, with a trembling voice, she responded, Okay, let's try again. But this has to be different. I can't go through that again, Ethan. He nodded, relieved, and hugged her tightly. Sophia allowed herself to relax in his arms, feeling the weight of her doubts lift, if only for a moment. But both knew that the real test was yet to come. As Ethan and Sophia worked on rebuilding their relationship, Margaret was going through her own storm of emotions at home. The revelation about her grandmother still echoed in her mind. Dolores, her grandmother, was of African descent. And now, how did this change the way she saw the world? How did it change who she was? She had always taken pride in her heritage, in her perfect family, and now she was faced with a reality she hadn't even known existed. More than that, she was forced to question her behavior, her view of Sophia, and how she had treated the young woman that night. Margaret sat in front of the mirror in her bedroom, staring at her own reflection. On the outside, she was the same woman as always, elegant, powerful, respected by everyone around her. But inside, everything was in ruins. How could she have been so blind? The truth was, she feared losing Ethan. And above all, she feared losing control. She had always ruled the family with a firm hand, deciding what was best for everyone. But now it seemed like the world around her was changing, and she was being left behind. As the days passed, Margaret reflected more and more on what to do. She knew she had made a mistake. She knew she couldn't keep Ethan by her side if she continued with her rigid stance. But at the same time, she felt incapable of changing. Arrogance and prejudice were like chains holding her down. She finally decided that she needed to do something. If she wanted to keep some connection with her son, she would have to change. And maybe the first step was to see Sophia in a different light. Margaret looked out the window of her room, watching the clear sky over New York. For the first time in a long while, she felt vulnerable. And for the first time, she was willing to do something about it. Days had passed since Ethan and Sophia's last meeting, and as they tried to move forward together, both knew the wound from the night of the gala hadn't fully healed. The tension between Sophia and Margaret still hung like a shadow over their relationship. And although Sophia had agreed to give her love with Ethan another chance, she still feared what the future held. It was a quiet afternoon when the doorbell to Sophia's apartment rang unexpectedly. When she opened the door, she found Margaret standing there, her expression visibly different from usual. The woman who had once exuded arrogance now appeared hesitant, perhaps even a bit vulnerable. "Sophia, may I come in?" Margaret asked, her voice softer than Sophia had ever heard before. Surprised, Sophia hesitated for a moment but finally nodded and made room for Margaret to enter. The silence between them was palpable as Margaret walked to the living room and sat on the couch, seeming to search for the right words. "I know I was unfair to you," Margaret began after a long sigh. "I know that night I made you feel unwelcome, and I need to apologize for that." Sophia, who had remained standing, crossed her arms, trying to mask the confusion and turmoil of emotions inside her. She had never imagined she'd hear these words from Margaret. Margaret continued, "You made me realize things about myself that I wasn't ready to face. I grew up in a world where we prided ourselves on being pure, superior. And now I realize how wrong I was." Sophia finally sat down across from Margaret, watching the woman in front of her with caution. "What changed, Margaret? Why now?" Margaret looked down at her hands, as if preparing to confess something important. "I discovered something about my own family, about my grandmother, Dolores. She had African ancestry, something that was hidden for generations, as if it were a shameful secret. When I learned this, I realized that the prejudice I've always held against you was also rooted in a lie about myself." Sophia remained silent, absorbing each word. There was something genuine in Margaret's tone, but at the same time, Sophia knew that the wounds wouldn't be healed by a simple apology. I don't know what to say," Sophia murmured, trying to organize her thoughts. "It's hard for me to believe that suddenly everything has changed." Margaret nodded, understanding Sophia's doubt. "I don't expect you to forgive me immediately. I just hope we can try to start over, for Ethan's sake. And for yours too. I know he loves you deeply, and I don't want to be the obstacle that destroys that." Sophia looked at Margaret, trying to read her intentions. She knew that the path to acceptance and reconciliation would be long, but there was something in Margaret's demeanor that seemed sincere. "I accept your apology, Margaret," Sophia said, her voice calm but firm. "But for this to work, we need to build something new. I can't live in that shadow of prejudice anymore." Margaret smiled, genuinely for the first time. "Thank you, Sophia. I know it won't be easy, but I'm willing to try." The two women, so different and yet now connected by a past Margaret never imagined, had finally found a starting point. Though the wounds were still fresh, that moment of reconciliation marked the beginning of something new, something they both knew would need to be nurtured with time and effort. After her conversation with Margaret, Sophia felt a mixture of relief and uncertainty. The apology had been a first step, but she knew that the real test of change would come with time. Ethan, upon hearing about the meeting between the two women, was deeply relieved. He had always wanted Sophia and his mother to find common ground, and now it seemed like that was finally starting to happen. A few days later, Sophia and Ethan decided it was time to give their relationship a new direction. They began talking about their future plans, the dreams they wanted to achieve together, and how to face the challenges that might still come. One of their first decisions was to start looking for a new home together, away from the expectations and pressures of Ethan's family. They both knew that in order to move forward, they needed a fresh start, a place that truly belonged to them, where they could build their lives on their own terms. Meanwhile, Margaret continued to reflect on her actions and the changes she needed to make. Though her apology to Sophia had been a significant first step, she knew that full reconciliation with her son would take time. She began to learn more about her own heritage, diving into her family's hidden history, realizing that to fully accept Ethan and Sophia's relationship, she first needed to accept her own past. One afternoon, Margaret appeared at Sophia and Ethan's apartment with an unexpected offer. "I want to help you both find a new place, a place that's truly yours. I know I've caused a lot of tension, and I want to do something to make things right." Sophia, still unsure how to fully react to Margaret's newfound attitude, thanked her for the gesture but stood firm in her response. "We appreciate your offer, Margaret, but we need to do this on our own. This is something we have to build together." Ethan agreed, appreciating his mother's change of heart, but also supporting Sophia's desire for independence. "Mom, we're grateful. But this is our time. We need to figure this out ourselves." For the first time, Margaret didn't push back or insist on having control. She nodded, accepting their decision with grace. "I understand," she said with a gentle smile, free from the arrogance of before. "I'll be here if you need anything." As Ethan and Sophia began preparing for this new phase of their lives, their relationship blossomed. They knew the journey toward full acceptance wouldn't be without its challenges, and that the world around them would still present obstacles. But with each step they took together, they felt stronger, more united, and ready to face whatever came their way. Though the reconciliation with Margaret was still a work in progress, the fact that she was willing to change was a positive sign. Ethan felt that he could finally have the best of both worlds, the unconditional love of Sophia and the gradual support of his mother. Over time, Sophia realized that despite the difficulties, she and Ethan were stronger than ever. The prejudice that once threatened to pull them apart now seemed like a distant battle, a challenge they had overcome through the power of their love and the strength of their convictions. And so, with the wind of New York blowing gently through the streets, Ethan and Sophia began their new chapter. A chapter where love, acceptance, and the courage to face the world together would guide them toward a bright and promising future. Where true beauty lay not in appearances, but in the depth of their hearts and the bravery to stand together against all odds.